No empire was ever destroyed by the thing it feared most. It was destroyed by the thing it desired. You were taught that pleasure is the reward, the prize at the top of the mountain. Comfort, abundance, and an easy landing after years of struggle. Work hard enough, earn enough, and one day you can finally relax. That is what many people believe life is about. But it is one of the most expensive lies a man can accept. The people who truly understood power always knew something colder and more uncomfortable. You do not destroy a strong man by taking things away from him. You destroy him by giving him everything he wants. You do not fight the lion. You keep feeding it until it forgets it was ever a lion. There is a name for what happens when a man becomes completely surrounded by comfort and pleasure. By the end of this video, you will recognize it, and there is a good chance you are already living inside it. The winter that defeated Hannibal. In the spring of 215 BC, an army walked out of a city and could no longer remember how to be feared. Only months earlier, that same army had achieved what seemed impossible. At the famous Battle of Cannae, Hannibal of Carthage surrounded and destroyed the largest army Rome had ever assembled. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died in a single day. Historians still study the battle because of how perfectly it was executed. Rome was shaken. The road to the city seemed open. Hannibal's soldiers were the most dangerous fighting force in the ancient world. They had crossed mountains, survived freezing conditions, marched through mud, and won battles that should have been impossible. Then they arrived in Capua, the second richest city in Italy. Warm baths, soft beds, endless food, fine wine, entertainment, comfort, ease. Everything a tired soldier could dream about. The city welcomed them with open arms and offered them a winter of complete luxury. According to the Roman historian Livy, that winter accomplished what Rome's armies could not. The soldiers who left Capua were not the same men who entered it. They became attached to comfort. When they had to sleep in tents again, when long marches returned, when hardship came back into their lives, many of them struggled. Livy wrote that they seemed like inexperienced recruits who had never seen battle before. Desertions increased. The sharp edge that once made them feared began to disappear. An old saying from that period summed it up perfectly. Capua was Hannibal's Cannae. The thing that damaged his army was not a sword. It was comfort. Historians still debate how much of this story is literally true. Hannibal continued fighting for years, but ancient people kept repeating this story for centuries because they recognized a pattern. They had seen it happen again and again. Hardship was not what weakened strong men. Hardship was often what made them strong in the first place. Comfort, the reward everyone dreams about, can become one of the most effective tools for slowly removing a man's strength without ever touching him. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If comfort is so dangerous, why does it feel so good while it is happening? The answer is inside your brain, and it has a chemical name. The bill always arrives. Most people misunderstand dopamine. They think dopamine is the chemical of pleasure. It is not. Dopamine is the chemical of desire. It is the feeling of anticipation. It is the hunger right before the reward arrives. It evolved to make human beings pursue things, to search for food, to build, to explore, to achieve, to move towards something valuable. Dopamine is strongest not when you receive the reward, but while you are reaching for it. In many ways, dopamine is the chemical signature of a person pursuing a mission. But there is something most people never hear about this system. It depends on balance. Psychiatrist Anna Lembke describes the brain's reward system as a seesaw. Pleasure sits on one side. Discomfort sits on the other. When pleasure rises too high, the brain pushes back. The brain cares deeply about balance, so it creates discomfort to restore equilibrium. Neuroscientists call this the opponent process mechanism, and it contains a cruel twist. The brain does not simply return to neutral, it often overshoots. You move from pleasure into a deficit. You experience this every day. The emptiness after overindulgence, the flat feeling after a short burst of excitement, the heavy feeling after spending an entire weekend doing nothing challenging, that low-energy, gray emotional state that often follows an easy high. That feeling is not separate from the pleasure. It is the cost of the pleasure. The same transaction, just delayed. And when a person repeatedly chases easy stimulation, junk food, endless scrolling, constant entertainment, and dozens of small dopamine hits before even getting out of bed, the brain begins adapting. It reduces sensitivity. It becomes less responsive. Researchers such as Nora Volkow have shown that dopamine signaling in heavily addicted brains can fall below normal levels. The person who spends years chasing pleasure does not end up feeling amazing. He often ends up struggling to feel much of anything. There is even a clinical term for this: anhedonia, the reduced ability to enjoy things that should naturally be enjoyable. At that point, stimulation is no longer used to feel good. It is used simply to feel normal. Think about how tragic that is. A system designed to help you pursue meaningful goals has been transformed into a system that keeps you consuming. And a person who spends his life consuming rarely builds anything extraordinary. This is only the first mechanism, because pleasure does something even more powerful. It changes what you are capable of wanting. The appetite that consumes itself. In 1956, researcher Frank Beach described one of the most unusual patterns in biology. The setup was simple. A male rat was placed with a female. They mated repeatedly. Eventually, the male became exhausted and lost interest. His drive appeared gone. Then researchers introduced a new female. Immediately, his interest returned. Not after rest, immediately. Scientists observed this pattern across many species. Rats, bulls, rams, birds, even snails. The phenomenon became known as the Coolidge effect. Inside the brain, dopamine activity falls as familiarity increases, then rises sharply when novelty appears. The drive was never only about the reward, it was also about the new. Now compare that reality to the modern world. For most of human history, novelty was limited. A new experience, a new opportunity, a new relationship, a new territory, all required effort, all required patience. But today, people carry an unlimited novelty machine in their pockets. Endless content, endless entertainment, endless new faces, endless stimulation. Every swipe promises something slightly more exciting than the last. Researchers studying compulsive digital content consumption often observe the same pattern. People do not simply want more. They want something newer, something stronger, something more stimulating. The appetite does not become satisfied. It becomes trained to demand more than normal life can provide. And this is where the danger appears. A person who constantly feeds this system is not only wasting time, he is training his brain to expect levels of stimulation that real life cannot match. Real achievements feel less exciting. Real relationships feel less engaging. Real experiences feel less meaningful. The problem is not that life became boring. The problem is that the brain's expectations became unrealistic. He begins to look at his life and wonder why everything feels dull. The work seems dull. The opportunities seem dull. The relationships seem dull. The world seems gray. He searches everywhere for the missing spark. A better job. A different city. A new goal. Another distraction. Yet he never considers the possibility that the problem is not outside him. The problem may be that he has exhausted the very system that was designed to help him appreciate life. Up to this point, it may sound like an unfortunate side effect of modern abundance, something that simply happened by accident, something that affects people living in a world far richer than the one their brains were designed for. Everything eventually points toward the same outcome, whether people realize it or not. A society full of men carrying the reward systems of spoiled princes, defending the very habits that slowly emptied them from the inside, convinced they are free simply because nobody is forcing them with a weapon. The rulers of the past had to capture people first. Today, many people walk into the palace willingly and lock the door behind themselves. That is the real shift in perspective. Pleasure is not simply the reward waiting at the end of the battle. For much of history, pleasure has often been the battle itself. The silent tool used to weaken men who were too dangerous to confront directly. The question is no longer whether the world is doing this to you. The harder question is, how much of it are you doing to yourself every single day without realizing it? Seneca and the soft body. The men who understood this danger wrote about it thousands of years ago. Most people ignore them because their ideas are uncomfortable. One of those men was Seneca. Seneca was not a poor monk living in isolation. He was one of the wealthiest philosophers in Rome, an advisor to an emperor, a man who could have enjoyed almost every luxury available in the ancient world. That is exactly why his warning matters. He was not speaking from ignorance. He was surrounded by comfort and observed carefully what it did to people. In his writings, Seneca made an important distinction that many modern people have forgotten. He separated pleasure from joy. Pleasure was the restless external excitement. Joy was something deeper, something stable, something that came from living with purpose and character, something that did not depend on circumstances. Seneca warned that pleasure, when left unchecked, does not create more happiness. Eventually, it moves toward its opposite. The endless chase often ends in disappointment. Long before modern neuroscience existed, he understood the same balance researchers talk about today. But one of his sharpest observations concerned the body. He watched wealthy Romans surround themselves with comfort. Heated floors, exotic foods, servants handling every inconvenience, protection from every discomfort. And he noticed a pattern. The more a man protects himself from hardship, the less hardship is required to break him. Comfort does not strengthen, it weakens resistance. A man who has never experienced cold struggles with a small draft. A man who has never experienced hunger becomes anxious over a delayed meal. A man who arranges his entire life around avoiding discomfort slowly hands control of his emotions to anything capable of disturbing that comfort. This is not simply a weakness of character. It is a blueprint for control. The person who cannot tolerate discomfort is already controlled by it. He bends under pressure because the threat of losing comfort becomes unbearable. His workplace knows it. His habits know it. Anything that controls his next source of comfort controls him. You cannot negotiate strongly. You cannot walk away. You cannot stand your ground, not if you are unable to tolerate the discomfort that comes with those actions. Your areas of softness reveal exactly where pressure can be applied. This is why the Stoics encouraged voluntary hardship, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because the man who becomes familiar with discomfort cannot easily be controlled by it. Yet there is a stage even lower than the soft man, a stage where a person no longer realizes anything is wrong. More than a century ago, a philosopher saw this coming, and it terrified him. The man who blinks, the philosopher, was Friedrich Nietzsche. The figure he feared most was not a tyrant, not a criminal, not even a nihilist. The person he feared most was the perfectly comfortable man. In his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche described a figure called the last man. For him, this represented the final decline of human ambition. The last man is created by a civilization that places comfort above everything else. He enjoys small pleasures during the day, small pleasures at night. He avoids danger, avoids hardship, avoids struggle. His life is safe, warm, fed, entertained, protected. According to Nietzsche, he has invented happiness. Then comes the famous image. And he blinks, a simple, contented blink. No fire, no hunger, no deep desire, no dream demanding pursuit. Nietzsche believed such a person could no longer create anything extraordinary, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he lacked the tension that drives creation, the inner chaos, the ambition, the dissatisfaction that pushes people beyond comfort. The disturbing part is that the last man does not feel miserable. He feels fine. If you told him he was losing something important, he would not understand. He would simply continue enjoying his routine, because the very ability to feel the loss disappeared first. The longing, the drive, the desire to become more. Comfort dissolved those qualities as before he even noticed. You cannot miss a hunger you no longer possess. That is why excessive comfort can be more dangerous than pain. Pain announces itself. Pain demands attention. Pain forces movement. Comfort works quietly. It convinces you everything is okay. The person struggling through hardship knows he is in a battle. The person slowly weakened by comfort believes he is winning. Think carefully about that feeling many people experience. The feeling that life is comfortable enough, that the dreams from youth were unrealistic anyway, that settling is simply maturity. Look closely at that feeling. Make sure it is peace. Because peace and surrender often wear the same face. From the inside, they can feel almost identical. Nietzsche saw society drifting toward the last man. Carl Jung noticed something similar, but he focused on a different type of person. A man many people know very well, perhaps even themselves. The boy who never lands. Jung described an archetype known as the eternal boy, a man who never fully grows into responsibility. Often he is talented, creative, charming, full of potential. That is what makes the story tragic. He is always about to accomplish something great. The book he plans to write, the business he plans to build, the body he plans to develop.